Timothy Baldwin, Esquire. Good to have you on with us today.
It's my pleasure to be on your show, Alex. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. Well, growing up, seeing your dad fight the New World Order, it's good to see you fighting it today. Tell us a little bit about your take on the state of the world right now and this key point in history. When the New World Order is openly emerging, people are waking up, but we're in a limited window to defeat them. Then let's get into your latest article, Freedom's Destruction Through Constitutional Deconstruction.
Well, Alex, as you've highlighted on your show for so many years, the corruption of the federal government, I think you would have to have your head completely in the sand not to know that there's some serious problems within the system of our government.
You know what? We lost your phone again, and it's the exact same sound with our last guest. It may be our system. We had a huge crash. It is our system? We had a huge crash, Timothy, yesterday. Can we go to an analog phone or something else with him immediately? Okay, let's start over, Timothy Baldwin, with the point you were making about having to have your head examined if you think the government isn't out of control. Go ahead.
Yeah, Alex, I think as our founder said, that the evidences are clear of the usurpations and the abuses of government. I mean, we could sit here and talk for months and months about the corruption that we've seen and what we believe it means and where it's leading. I think that the evidence is very clear that they're trying to unite the nations in a global type economy and structure. Of course, this goes in line with their desire for power and money. It's the nature of mankind to use other people for their advantage, and this is what we're seeing. And what I have tried to do is I have tried to study history and particularly our history to see what cures there are for this type of abuse and this type of encroachment. And my conclusion is that it's similar to what Alexander Hamilton said. And of course, I'm no fan of Alexander Hamilton, but I believe what he said in the Federalist Papers was very true, and that is to best preserve freedom, you need power to be able to check power. And of course, the context of what he said there was that the state governments were to be used to check the federal government. And that's something we
a separation of powers. Powers set against themselves, and that was one of the few issues that the founders unanimously agreed upon. They just debated about how to arrange that structure, and they did a lot off the Greek, and of course the common law in England, and of course off the Dutch system, as you know. But now that's been undermined by the foreign and offshore corporations. That's why we need to take over the local governments, and that's why we need to also, as patriots, take over the government and have the long view of history. And that's why we need to financially support alternative media and institutions so that we can grow our power to then be able to face down the establishment. Go ahead.
Well, and this is something that I'm trying to educate people when I talk and when I write about this subject. When you study our history, one thing is very clear. Our founders and the ratifiers of our Constitution rejected the national form of government. And they were very clear that what they wanted was a federal system. That is, the states had co-equal power with regard to all the powers that they retained under the 10th Amendment.
And Ninth.
And of course, and the 9th Amendment as well. But the problem, what we have here, if we look through the U.S. Supreme Court decisions, we have a complete reversal of that idea and that understanding.
And that starts after the Civil War, does it not?
Well, it started before that because the U.S., particularly under Joseph Story's court and also, of course, John Marshall, they tried to establish through their decisions that the federal government was a supreme sovereignty over the state sovereignties through the Supremacy Clause. And what they tried to establish was the U.S. Supreme Court has the ultimate final decision on what the Constitution means. And that's just contrary to what our federal system is all about. It is power checking power, state power checking federal power. And as you just mentioned, after the Civil War, they really were able to grab a hold of that idea and force the states to do what they want them to do. And that's been one of the biggest detrimental causes of freedom in our country today.
Absolutely. And from the beginning, the founders stated it was a confederation of states that met to arbitrate their disputes in the federal Congress, but that any time a state wanted to leave or a state wanted to make deals with someone else, they were allowed to do that under the 9th and 10th Amendment. We've seen a total reversal, and then once you have a centralized federal all-powerful government, it can then be taken over by foreign offshore governments or private institutions, and that's now happened.
Yes, exactly. And you know, Alex, if there's one thing I would wish people would get a concept of, and that is the concept that the states have just as much power to defend freedom as any other sovereign country or sovereign
But they must
state.
exercise that power.
They must, and unfortunately, for more than 100 years, the states have really not done that. It's only until recently that the states are actually becoming more aware of their powers under the 10th Amendment, all the retained powers that they have, to try to once again reestablish these ideals of freedom that we hold. And it's good to see some of the states doing that. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Montana Firearms Freedom Act, which I am actually a part of that litigation, by the way.
Well, good. For those that don't know about it, why don't you tell people?
Well, it's a law that was passed in Montana and, of course, in Tennessee as well, and other states are introducing this bill. And
it's got the feds very, very scared, and it's something you and your father helped lead. Another example of ideas, putting them into action, true leadership. And if others get behind this, it is a tide that is going to be unstoppable.
Exactly, because what it says is, look, if we create this product, in this case it's a gun, but it could be anything. If we create this product and when we sell it within our sovereign borders, in this case the state of Montana, then the federal regulations have no applicability in that state whatsoever.
The interstate commerce clause has no authority.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do. And of course, I wasn't the great people in Montana that passed this. I didn't influence them, I don't think, in doing this. They did this on their own, and it's catching on like wildfire. Similar to the state sovereignty resolutions, but this is something that has teeth. This is something that has power behind it, because essentially it is reversing about 130 years of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have, well, actually, I'll take that back, about 80 years of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have given Congress this power to just roughshod over state sovereignty, and it's reversing all that. So it's very important, but it's things like that that are going to protect freedom, and it's going to really put the brakes on this New World Order. If we stop and think about it, the federal government has absolutely no power to do anything unless the states are behind them and supporting them. So as soon as the states realize that they have the power to stop this almost overnight, we may see a chance of restoration in this country. But until we get back to this idea, I don't believe that we're going to have much of a chance, short of just outright revolution. And I don't think many people want to go down that road because of the cost it entails at this point. But the point is that we have to get back to the ideas of federalism, which were the protecting guardians of freedom in this country.
Absolutely. Go through the battle plan that you break down in this article.
Well, you're referring to the freedom's destruction through constitutional.
Sure, and some of the other articles you and the Constitution Party, your father, and others have been putting out, battle plans, dealing with the states, teaching people the right and proper duties of the state and the people that reside within the states.
Well, that particular article that I wrote, it really, what I try to do is highlight the fact that during the Constitutional Convention debates, the founders and the ratifiers rejected this notion that the federal government has the power to negate state laws, and that, in other words, under the 10th Amendment, the state laws under their sovereignty was not to be negated by the federal laws. They rejected that idea. So, in other words, the states still have the power to do this, and it's through the constitutional amendment process that the states are to decide what they want the Constitution to be, to preserve the freedoms. And what I try to do is highlight the fact that this is not what has been told us over the past 100 years. We've been told that the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal government has supreme sovereignty over the states, and it just is not true. It was rejected by the founders and by the ratifiers specifically. The history is very clear on this subject, Alex. Of course, I'm sure you know this, but your listeners need to understand that this is very clear. We know that the founders rejected the nationalistic idea that states are to have the same co-equal powers that the federal government has with regard to their powers.
And that's co-equal on the three powers delegated to the federal government. The states are actually superior to the federal government because all powers not expressly delegated to the federal government are expressly reserved to the states or the people.
Yeah, exactly right. You know, if you take a look at what they rejected, what they actually proposed during the conventions for the federal government to have power to regulate, if you look at that, it mentioned agriculture, it mentioned education, it mentioned commerce in general, and they actually rejected those and removed those from the federal government's power. So yes, their power is very, very limited, and it's only been through this supposed living constitution idea that we have been defrauded.